Welcome, everyone, to the Civmetrics Civic Development Podcast. I'm Ted Ballantyne, the editor-in-chief of Civmetrics. Today, we have a great discussion about infrastructure spending in the current Congress. From the big, beautiful bill and beyond, what can we expect from this Congress? And to break it all down, we have three infrastructure veterans joining us. Tom John is a partner in Taft Law's Public Affairs Strategies Group. Seth Gabriel is a principal at Taft Infrastructure Advisors. And Emily Hauber is the president and CEO of the Conventum Group. All three have worked extensively at the federal, state, and local level on infrastructure projects. Their conversation covers everything on the table in this Congress. So, without further ado, here is their conversation.
Good afternoon. So, 6 months into the 119th Congress, what one word or phrase captures the mood for Capitol Hill towards infrastructure spending? We'll start, Emily, with you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. It's so great to be here with y'all to have what I think is a really important and timely discussion about where the 119th Congress is as it relates to infrastructure and spending. I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag and kind of disjointed. And we can talk a little bit more about what that means.
Great. Seth, what would you say?
I would add a level of hesitation, mainly because you have reauthorization, reconciliation, everything, parting of the Red Sea, all simultaneously, where it's kind of you're building the airplane while driving on a train track. I think a lot of members are just kind of almost in a state of confusion as to what bill are we voting on today? What are we looking at now when it comes in reference to transportation? Because there's so much is going on at the same time in order or in reverse order than what is normal.
So that's a great setup. So Emily, how does that translate into the committee priorities and markup calendars?
Yeah, great question. So as I was mentioning, you saw the House Transportation Infrastructure Chairman Sam Graves recognize how difficult reauthorization is going to be. The trust funds are at significant deficits and just really aren't at pace to keep up. So he was trying to be proactive in inserting a revenue provision into the reconciliation package, but at least as of now, it is not getting included on the Senate side. It appears that the House is trying to be more proactive, but again, a little bit disjointed, not totally unusual. It's actually shaping up to be more like what we saw with the safety loo reauthorization back when Don Young was pretty aggressive about adding revenue, but the finance committees were more skeptical and cool on adding those provisions. So I anticipate this to be more like that versus some of the more recent reauthorization processes.
So Seth, getting into some more detailed legislation, HR 1235, the Federal Infrastructure Bank. So we've heard this talk over the years about it. What does that mean? The bank would wield up to $500 billion direct loans and guarantees. How might that reshape P3 capital stacks, mezzanine debt, credit swaps, and even equity substitutes?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We've talked about this for forever, as far as I can recall, in the industry of comparing ourselves to other places that do have infrastructure banks and then trying to just get straight in our own heads of, well, how is this different than TIFIA and WIFIA and PABs? But then you bring in the direct investment and to your point, does this crowd anyone out? I'm not sure it does. I think, at least in my view, that you would have just another federal tool for these projects. And just as when TIFIA came about early on, a lot of the investment community was a bit worried that it was going to crowd them out. And now it is the best thing that's happened to infrastructure, in my view, because it just is a force multiplier for that private equity. So if you have a federal instrument making well thought out, intelligent investments in different projects, that makes sense. I think that would actually embolden and empower the private equity market to continue on with them for projects. And we should hopefully get more done.
So Emily, as Seth alluded to, and I did too, this has been a topic of conversation for a while. How likely do we think it is to get there, and what are the pieces that are going to have to come together for it to actually happen?
Yeah, the devil's always in the details. And there's no magic money. So I would say I give it about 50-50. Always take the over usually when it comes to congressional action. But, as Seth alluded to, there are a number of tools that we already have. And, I would say our focus really should be about making sure that those tools are working as best as they possibly can. We will always accept, more funding, but making sure that it's being programmed in a way that actually moves the infrastructure needle.
So talking about other tools, one of them is private activity bonds, and there is potentially cap expansion. Several of the drafts show some expansion. And what projects jump to the queue if that actually happens? What do you think happens with that?
There is no shortage of infrastructure needs, and being able to expand the utilization of some of these tools to other, what I would call more non-traditional infrastructure investments is something we should all be talking about and advocating for what the value of those tools can be in moving those infrastructure pieces forward. That being said, just within the traditional, roads and bridges program, we are going to see what capacity may be added to the private activity bonds cap probably get used up in the within the next reauthorization cycle. And there's a strategic discussion to be had about is it better to just remove the cap entirely, or to continue to go back to the well by showing the value of these tools. I do think that lawmakers and policymakers generally get bogged down in theory. And so they look at all debt as the same. And, the federal debt and deficit is definitely a hot topic right now, as it should be. But not all debt is the same. And so looking at expanding that tool, looking at utilizing it across infrastructure classes, I think is something that from the broader infrastructure community is something we should be looking at. However, the more projects you put in the pool, the less there is for other kinds of projects. So it's weighing that return on investment, timing and value of money, and using those tools and making sure that, again, we're lining them up to be as efficiently, effectively used as possible.
So Seth, would a bigger PAB pool reduce demand for TIFIA, or do the two tools complement each other?
No, I think they complement each other, and quite honestly, I think especially now with the priorities set out by the administration and how they want to do things, I can see those two between PABs and TIFIA actually more space between them, kind of diverging to what types of projects they go to, and so I think it's I will probably use this answer for many of the questions, Tom, but I would say increase the limit on both.
Going back to another Senate 1480, direct pay American infrastructure bonds, Seth. 28% interest subsidy revives the Build America bond model, where issues would draw the line between taxable AIBs and tax-exempt PABs if the PAB cap stays tight. Do you think that is a possible alternative if PABs aren't expanded? Is that a place to go?
Yeah, I certainly think it is. I think we're going to be getting into a space and a time where asset owners are going to start looking at taxable debt, where maybe the attractiveness of tax-exempt debt will not be as great as it was. I mean, I think the three of us know on here, there are definitely rumblings on Capitol Hill of maybe doing away with tax-exempt bonds. We'll see if that, I don't know where Emily would put that. I think it's not 50-50, but just the idea that that's being discussed in any kind of real way highlights, well, maybe we start to look for some alternatives. And, depending on how certain things go in the bond market and the economy, your delta between taxable and tax-exempt debt can be very small. Relatively small. And if that is an easier path, going to something that is taxable debt, I'm not sure that is a non-starter for people who are buying that debt.
Makes perfect sense. So, and in fact, I mean, to your point, really SALT caps are the first step towards getting rid of that, right? So that's something that you can easily see, at least in the possibilities. So moving to user fee politics, budget discipline, Emily. House GOP leaders tied a $200 annual federal EV fee to the FAA bill. Does that signal a broader user pay revival, and how does that affect the aptitude for revenue risk concessions?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, House T&I Chairman Graves did include a provision, even as recent as the budget reconciliation package. Um, I'd like to say there's more political appetite for all users pay, but I'm not seeing it really come to fruition. Have heard some chattering on the administration side that might be something that they're open to. It is politically very challenging, as you all know. That being said, we are looking at, 50 to two-thirds deficits in our trust funds. I mean, that's on the highway side. The transit trust funds even worse. So we haven't raised the gas tax in over 30 years. It's not keeping up with inflation and just general cost of doing business. So we're at a pinch point here. But I think, bigger than that, it's looking at what are the base programs, what is needed, making sure that we do have the right sized tools for that. So I'll use a little bit of a tangent, but to bring us back to the topic at hand is how do we get enough funding into infrastructure? We're at a crossroads, I'd say. So when it came to the Biden administration and IIJA, you saw a huge amount of public funding going into infrastructure investments. And what we found was really kind of two things. One, inflation ate up about 50% of that extra money. And two, you had these supersized discretionary grant programs that states and localities expended a ton of resources chasing, but these programs are oversubscribed by 5 to 10 times. And what that tells me is that the base programs are not sufficient to deliver our infrastructure. And I know I'm like Captain Obvious and preaching to the choir here, but let's look at, again, the most efficient. That to me does not feel very efficient in how you move the limited federal resources that we have to the projects that can most and best use them. And then you had in the first Trump administration kind of going the other way and looking at doing infrastructure investment more from a financing perspective and less so much traditional funding investment. And that doesn't really work either. So it's that sweet spot where you've got enough of a base program so that states and localities can plan for infrastructure investments, plus financing tools that work and that whether we use the carrot or the stick model, but are incentivizing the kinds of infrastructure that can best use federal resources. So whether it be all users pay, that is definitely a tool in the toolbox to kind of backfill where we've been in our highway or in our trust fund capacity. But I think we have to look bigger than that because it's going to take all of the pieces to even make a dent in our, infrastructure deficit.
Given all this complexity, Seth, shadow toll or availability payment, what's a smarter play for a state DOT in this climate?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that one. One, I think it would depend on the state. I mean, we always say here, like the thing after we say about P3s is you've seen one P3, you've seen one P3. They're all different, and so from each state to state, depending on their policies and how they want to do it, those two models that are similar but different are going to have to be more of a political decision. So, do you really want to count cars? Or do you just want to say, this is what we're paying, this is the road, make sure it's maintained? I think it goes back to a lot of what Emily was highlighting of, well, do you have the funding to back up the financing of what you're doing? Meaning, okay, I have the money, I can make the availability payment. This is not a financing question, done and done. Or is it, well, I need to be able to count these vehicles and what kind of vehicles are using this roadway, and so that I can find a way to have a workable revenue capture model that would feed into that shadow toll to get there. I mean, and I say this as someone who has an electric car as my primary vehicle. I start to feel guilty because I've paid $0 into the trust fund. I don't even have to pay to register the car where I here in DC, and that's the case for a lot of places. So we need to find a better model. Or quite honestly, I'll go out on a limb. We need to have a real discussion about the trust fund. If we're not going to fund it appropriately, what are we doing? We just keep letting it go bankrupt and then refilling it with general funds, and that is not a sustainable way of building out infrastructure in the country.
So Seth identifies the real problem, right? And you have earlier, Emily. DC, we don't know what money's there. We don't know what money's coming out. So if you're a state DOT or legislature looking at this, I think it's pretty clear whether you're talking about Doge or something else, there's going to be more responsibility foisted upon the states. How should they look at these issues, and what might be best practices they should consider as to how they fill the gaps that may be left by the federal government?
I'll take it first. So where I think we've seen projects be most successful is, or I would say infrastructure programs, bigger picture, is where you have a vision and where, of course, there's political will, but it really comes down to a vision. And so utilizing the limited federal resources and state resources and local resources for that matter to be able to comprehensively move infrastructure forward. So Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina in particular in recent years have done a great job having, in my opinion, a vision for how they're going to deal with the day-to-day problems of infrastructure that their people are feeling. Congestion relief, first and foremost, but it has environmental impacts too. And so it's not either or. I live in Colorado and we've done some things really well here, but you look back, a decade ago and our Department of Transportation put out a report that had about 8 viable alternative delivery projects, 6 of which had positive cash flow, and they've not advanced any of them. And more people have moved to Colorado. We have, wonderful things here, many great opportunities, but they have not kept pace. And I think it really is just their vision is different, and they're investing their limited resources in different ways. But in the places where we've seen, I would say, a return on investment from just not necessarily hard dollars, but more the soft side that people feel, it is those places that have a vision and the political will to get behind it.
So, Seth, obviously, a piece still may be the federal financing piece of this. So, draft language would widen TIFIA and WIFIA, which obviously isn't direct cash, but it's an opportunity. Where do you expect Congress to land on the social infrastructure program level of this, and how should states and localities look at that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think probably the push of TIFIA into non-transportation assets is done. We've heard so much very directly from leading members of Congress. So I think TIFIA will be for transport and don't ask about transit-oriented development. WIFIA and maybe other federal programs, I think there will still be an appetite for that, and an appetite in jurisdictions that tend to vote towards the current majority party, to put it bluntly, because those are the places that are growing. It's just political math. If you are in, I'll pick on Florida, a red state, people are moving to Florida. They need to build more infrastructure. These are very useful and sometimes absolutely necessary tools. So just political calculus gets you to a place where you're probably going to be expanding the federal, maybe not federal participation, but these federal loan, and let's be honest, they're really more loan guarantee programs than anything. They're a backstop of private debt that's rolled into this tax-exempt packaging that we put them in. So I think we will, in some calculus, come up with a way to expand that. Tommy, you mentioned the great debate about the state and local tax exemption. Like, I think that's all in there. I think that's in that calculus of like, okay, well, maybe you get a little more states with higher local and state tax. You can write off more, but you know what? We're going to do something for those states with lower state and local tax, and this could be that thing.
Should we send you to DC?
I'm already here, but I'm in the city of Washington, not the federal district.
You couldn't even be elected. Sorry. Emily, so climate and labor overlays, Democrat bills tie credit to resilience metrics. Republicans want Davis-Bacon. How is the regulatory uncertainty influencing procurement timelines? Denver's experience included with regard to that.
Yeah, so I always think that this is such a funny topic, particularly as it relates to construction jobs, because more often, it's been a perennial issue, Davis-Bacon. More often than not, they're being paid prevailing wage, and part of me, from a political perspective, are like, just give it to them. Let's move on because we've got bigger fish to fry. But I would say, infrastructure, moving people and goods, shouldn't necessarily have a blue or a red tinge. I mean, this is really about, the quality of life, and obviously around the margins, we can debate what that looks like and what level of, federal participation, and is it direct funding or is it financing? I mean, all of those things are why we have, varying levels of government and policymakers. But from a regulatory perspective, I would just say, making sure that we have protected our communities from, an environmental standpoint, but also recognizing that sometimes we just get in our own way bureaucratically, and that is holding up projects. I would say just taking grant programs, for example, coming out of IIJA, you had obviously a big push on Justice 40 community investments, and, green infrastructure, green energy, but you also are hearing a lot around opportunity zones again when it comes to this administration. And to me, Justice 40 and opportunity zones, while not exactly the same, they're very similar. And we can talk about how we want to drive policy and investments, and we can use different tools to do that. So I would say it's about understanding what the political reality is of the decision makers. So if it is saying Justice 40 or saying opportunity zone, and then aligning the regulatory environment underneath to be able to create those more attractive investment opportunities for infrastructure investment.
Makes complete sense. So lightning round, Seth, if you had a pen for a day, what single amendment would you add to improve P3 market?
I'm not sure amendment. I would just expand authorization for TAFs, PIFIA, WIFIA, all those programs. One, and this is really wonky, so my apologies to anyone listening or watching this. The scoring is so beneficial of these programs because they're just really loan guarantees, as I said. But their impact is so large, just proportional of achieving the goal of more infrastructure that it makes zero financial sense not to expand them. And if you are a member of Congress who didn't like the idea of, well, all these grant programs and spending money, because yes, inflation ate up a lot because the inflation was created by spending more money, by creating more money. This doesn't do this. It's a loan program. We're not creating new money, just sending out. Two, if you were a member of Congress and you're worried if we just have these grants, then people will fund whatever they want. Well, with these loan programs, there's a lot of review. And anyone who's lived through a TIFIA review knows just the level and detail that goes along with the federal review and approval of these programs. And then three, if you're in a place where it really needs a lot of these infrastructure, a lot of municipalities don't have credit ratings. They haven't issued debt. And this is really their the only way they're going to be able to do it in any expedient fashion. And so you're helping places that need it. It doesn't really affect the way we do math at the federal budget. Doesn't have that great impact, if at all. The default rate is extremely low, and it gives, actually, don't say it too loudly, more federal control over what projects get done. And so why not just expand it? It seems to check a box of what a lot of members are saying they want. They just don't like that it's debt. So we need to come up with a different word, Emily. Let's call it something else. Infrastructure something. I don't know.
Very does.
So, Emily, one provision you're watching most closely.
So along those same lines as Seth, I think that particularly TIFIA, but we can broaden it out to the other financing programs, treat all modes the same. And you have, in Title 23, you have the 80-20 provision when it comes to federal versus non-federal money requirements. Mirror that with TIFIA. Like, let's just make it 80-20. We saw Congress pull back, some of the TIFIA capacity because it wasn't being used. We can talk about why that is. But let's incentivize the use of it. Let's make it more efficient and nimble, and the availability of funding to finance that, a greater level of project costs, I think would help utilize the program better.
So, finally, practical takeaways. We've had a lot of, as I said, wonkish discussion here. What are the practical takeaways for state and local officials listening? 3 concrete steps to position projects in this legislative flux.
I would say big picture, whether you're doing it through delivering your project through a more traditional delivery or alternative delivery, money is not free and money is not magical. You have to make sure that the economics of your project work, and that you've done your stakeholder due diligence before moving projects forward. So, the federal government does play a role, in state government even more so, in the regulatory and funding and financing environment of different states. But I would just say, good projects are good projects and bad projects are bad projects. So making sure that the economics work and you've done due diligence around stakeholder engagement, I think really helps not remove, but mitigate some of that risk that you would find later on, whether it be financial risk or political risk if you haven't done your stakeholder work. So from a practical perspective, I would say that's good projects are good projects and bad projects aren't necessary. They magically don't become good projects.
So, Seth, how do you build optionality into your procurement so deals stay bankable as things shift? We may have political change even as soon as next year, but what is the practical advice there for a stakeholder to make sure that they're still going to be good in 2027?
I'm not sure I could say it better than how Emily said it. It's a good project, and my definition of that is that it actually achieves some objective that can be articulated to the end user. I mean, like, what does this thing do? Don't build something just for the sake of building it because. And I felt very old. I used this in a class, and people are talking about, but the Simpsons monorail example. If it just because the next town has a monorail and it didn't work doesn't mean you need to build a monorail. Build the projects you need. Make sure that they make sense to people, and make sure that they're affordable, or today and tomorrow. And if you hit all those boxes, you could have a complete change in administrations at all levels, and it's still a good project that makes sense, that's needed, and will generate economic activity and can be paid for. And I haven't yet to see an elected official that would come in and kill off a project that has been structured in that way. So that's the optionality of, all right, we can afford this thing. All right, do you want to do it through more debt financing? Sure. You want to do direct pay? Okay. As long as you can have all those options and it makes sense to people, it will still happen.
And know what problem you're solving.
Well, yeah, that's the hardest part. There's so many solutions looking for a problem in infrastructure land.
Exactly. Well, thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Tom, Seth, and Emily for their insightful conversation. Thank you for watching, everyone, and join us next time for more civic development insights.